Blasphemous is a great game the first time through. If you're fast and precise with your explorations, I'd like to say that it has great replayability because of the amazing exploration and combat, but there are a couple things holding it back for me personally. It should be noted that this game is a Metroidvania style game. Exploration and upgrades are what drive it forward. We'll be getting into this throughout the review, but my spoiler-free rating is a solid 8 out of 10. So go and play it if you haven't already, sink in your 15 to 20 hour playthrough, and really get a feel for it. Then come back to this video. That's the spoiler warning for this, so you have been warned. Blasphemous is a game developed by The Game Kitchen, and I've been following this project for a couple of years now, ever since I saw it on Kickstarter a long while ago. It's really great to see how well it's turned out, as their, to my knowledge, first attempt at a game like this. There are other games where point-and-click horrors with the same, albeit less defined, pixel art style. I have not played those games, only watched videos from other YouTubers. This game starts out with a strong setting. I really like it. You're a nameless, penitent one in a sea of corpses, likely brought about by what's referred to as the Miracle, which is the overarching enemy of the game, or it could be seen as an ally in another way. Our hero pulls a blade from a statue who used to be a woman, who I think brought about this miracle. He pulls the blade out of this statue, and the game begins. But moving away from the story a little bit, you wake up and are immediately taught how to heal, which is great. You start at low health and can't move until you heal, so it forces you to learn that. And if you're anything like me, you'll immediately start jumping around and swinging around your sword, mashing every button to see what exactly all of the buttons do. There aren't any enemies in this beginning area, so you have as much time to play around as you want, mashing every button to see what they do. If you fail a very early on jump, you learn how to climb ladders, which is something that you'll be doing a lot throughout the game. If you make this jump, you'll learn that your hero knows how to grab onto ledges and pull himself up, which teaches you that most of the jumps won't be exactly as precise of other Metroidvanias. You'll learn how to fall down ledges, slide, and then eventually you'll learn about breaking objects in the world, which is pretty basic stuff. Right after this, you'll find your bonfires of the game, because I don't really know how to say the name. I think it's Priya-dew. You respawn at them and you'll refill your healing jars. They're called bile jars. If you broke the breakable objects, that also teaches you that the world resets when you heal here, because they'll come back. So do you. You come back here on death. This also brings to light the first issue with the game. Your mana doesn't refill when you heal at these. Instead, you have to hold a button to sacrifice your health and spend a little bit of currency to do so. So if you want to refill your mana fully, you'll need to heal, cut yourself for the mana, then heal again, wasting a little bit of time every single time you want to heal. Moving forward into the next room, you'll encounter the very first enemy of the game, which is a boss. And it isn't a difficult boss, but it teaches you what you need to know. On screen here, I'll be almost perfecting the boss. It's that easy. If you like air attacks, you'll learn that holding down and attacking will juggle you in the air for 2 swings before falling. You'll also learn that sliding past enemies is a valid option for combat, but only when they're in wind-up animations or recoveries. If you get too close, you'll get hurt, even if the enemy doesn't attack. I personally think this is a problem for a game with limited health that doesn't regenerate. It's like everyone has spikes sticking out of their skin that can stagger and hurt you, along with their regular attacks. It gets addressed later with a trinket, but I still think it isn't a great mechanic. But back to the story. Once you kill this guy, our hero, the penitent one, does something very strange, and it's something he never does again, where he'll lean down next to the dead guy and fill up his hat with blood, and then he'll put it back on. It's pretty cool, but don't expect too many cutscenes to happen past this point. It's not going to happen with every single fight, which is good, because none of the cutscenes in this game are skippable. Back to the gameplay. Running forward, you'll encounter your first and second locked door. The first key, which is attached to the background, requires a key, but the second one needs you to break a glass mechanism to pull open the door right in front of you. It's like a gate that slides up. Remember this because it's used very frequently, almost for every other door in the game. We meet our first friendly NPC after this. He's wearing a semi-similar hat to you, but his face is covered. I didn't really think much of him my first playthrough. He spouts some exposition and sends you on a quest to carry out the 3 humiliations and open a door. Similar to Dark Souls 1, you go through a couple areas to open a giant door, he gives you an item, and you're on your merry way. Now that you're free from the cathedral, you're pitted against some of these extremely basic enemies. They just walk at you, they don't even attack. They literally just walk at you. I don't even know why you have to kill the boss first, and then these guys. After that, you'll find enemies that are actually capable of hurting you. And they have these big wheels, and they teach you about parrying and righteous deflections as well as executions. They're very important, as parrying gives you immunity, and righteous deflections do extra damage that allow you to one-shot most enemies that you can do it to. Righteous reflections are done by pressing the X button on an Xbox controller at the same time as impact when you parry. Executing them afterwards gives a lot of mana, so it's worth learning how to do this if you like to use the prayers, which is what we'll talk about next. That mana bar up at the top that I mentioned earlier fills up as you hit enemies or execute them. That means it's limited, so you have to use it to do damage to enemies that are far away or difficult enemies that you're not comfortable getting close to yet. Right after this, however, after the wheelmen, moving forward, you're taught about the boggy areas. You can't move well in these, and enemies come out of the floor that, again, just move towards you and don't attack. Once you finish up with the boggy areas, observant players will probably notice red floating particles in the air above you and an item without a way to get to them. Then, right after you see this item, you see a little floating baby in a golden box, which, like most players, I hit and knocked it down, and a big 1 out of 33 appeared at the top of my screen. It's a collectible. You're free to hit them in any means necessary, and try and get all of them. And that's the end of the first area. You get to the main hub after this, and look around and see your first couple NPCs that are going to give you a quest, other than the first guy that told you the story of the game. These NPCs ask for healing items, and another asks you to find body parts, which is another collectible throughout the game. And this seems really crammed for the first maybe 10 minutes of gameplay, because you're going to get through this pretty quickly. And because of that, they needed to cram it all into the first area, the first hub, with all your NPCs. You walk around and there's a couple levers and locked doors all around the place, some babies out of reach, and your first weapon upgrade station. It tells you early on that there are 7 of these in total, and they're found sparsely throughout the game. You have to find all of them to make your weapon work at its full capacity. These stations are called the Mea Culpa Shrines, as your weapon is called the Mea Culpa, or Mea Culpa. The enemies here are great and teach you how to deal with ranged enemies as well as slow-moving melee enemies. They also teach you that your parries don't always lead to damage. Some enemies are so large your hero can't quite parry them, he has to deflect them instead, which just lets you not take any damage, nor deal any. At the end of the first room, you can see an enemy out of reach guarding an item, knowing you'll come back here later after you've moved forward. This brings us to the segue areas. This one, the Wasteland of Buried Churches, is the first of many in-between areas, ones that branch out into 2, sometimes 3 more levels. It also has the first shielded enemies of the game. As other shielded enemies in other games, you either have to get around them or wait for them to attack and be in recovery to hurt them. These ones demand that you learn how to parry effectively, since their wind-up before a swing is the only time you can hurt them other than going around them, and this is a quick wind-up. So soon after seeing that enemy below you in the area prior to this, you're already able to fight it, just by exploring through this little segue area. This enemy will likely beat newcomers to the genre a couple times before they get the hang of it. It killed me 3 times on my first playthrough. This is also the first introduction to a rosary bead and shortcut if you didn't fully explore the hub. If you come down here, it's entirely optional, but the enemy won't respawn, unlike the others, and this pathway will be clear from now on to move through quicker. After that, by this point, you're probably going to be low on health vials, and this is where the similarities to Dark Souls come in full force. There are no ways to heal other than those vials. Replenishing them makes the enemies respawn, so do you run back or keep pushing forward, not knowing what's ahead? This will be a constant struggle throughout the entirety of the game, so you better get used to playing carefully. Or you better get good at corpse running. Moving on, eventually, as you move to the right some more, you'll find the first bottomless pit of the game. These are instant death and will never be survivable. They're indicated by a thick white smoke above the pit to show you where they are for no confusion. After this, you find another segue area, of course, with 3 choices. Go up, right, or down. This is where player progression diverges a bit. Before this, you've just been running in a straight path. On my first playthrough, I chose to go up. On my second, I went down. I recommend going up here since there's an NPC there that dies and locks you out of a couple necessary upgrades for 100%ing the game on your first run through. If you don't do this, you'll have to go through a whole second playthrough if you miss this questline. If you decided to go down, however, you're going to see a cutscene of a man foreshadowing a fight. He talks about how he foretold a newcomer coming to see his sister and how he'll deal with you. But in this area, after that cutscene, you're introduced to spike traps, indicated by blood and a sharp sound effect. These hurt and knock you back, so avoid them. This is different from floor spikes that are an instant kill. They send you straight back to your checkpoint, those ones. This is a good time to talk about the death mechanics in Blasphemous. If you die, you need to do a corpse run, but it's not as harsh as Dark Souls' corpse run. In this game, your only setback from death is that your mana bar can't fully regenerate. The more you die, the more it's covered, sort of like Demon Souls and Dark Souls 2, but with mana instead of health. This area will teach you about how a lot of the secrets in the games work. By putting a destructible object in front of a wall, you're likely to slap down the wall and claim your collectible. Once you learn this, however, you're encouraged to hit every single wall. And you should. Why wouldn't you? Because health increases, bile jar increases, trinket slots, almost everything opens up exclusively from secrets. More on those mechanics later, though. There are a couple problems with that. At the end of Mercy Dreams, you'll find a lady who pledges herself to help you during boss fights if you require it. This is the indicator that you're coming up on a boss fight. Coupled with a save point in front of a giant golden door, you're going to fight a boss here. Now, if you take the lady, she doesn't tell you, but the next time you see her, she'll be old and withered. I didn't fully exhaust using up the uses on her, so I assume that there's 3. If you decide to do this boss fight, you should tell her beforehand that you don't want her help, or she'll come in with you. She heals you during the fight if you get to low health and run over to her. If you don't decide to go and fight this boss, however, you can go anywhere else you please, and if you do that, by running to the right instead of running to the left, which is the boss room, you'll be rewarded with a fast travel point, of which there are only 5 in the game. The first one you find will bring you to your second one, which will be in the hub, next to the Mea Culpa upgrade station. There's 5 throughout the whole game. Only 5. Forcing you to learn the areas and their respective instant death zones, lest you be sprinting through them a lot more than you'll ever want to. Going back to the boss fight, you'll move on and claim the first of the 3 items that the first NPC sent you on as your main quest. You'll need to move to the other half of the game with these 3 items. And if you keep running to the left after the boss fight, you'll find your buddy again, the guy from the beginning, and your first health upgrade, if you find the secret. On my first playthrough, I went through a very different health upgrade and fought this boss from the other side. It's a cool click moment when I got to fight the boss on my second playthrough, coming from completely different and probably the intended level. On my first playthrough, I climbed up the mountain, and that mountain heavily discourages you from climbing it. It's got strong winds that push you back, it's got difficult flying enemies before you have any kind of ranged attack, and the only save point is halfway up or at the bottom. You'd be hard-pressed to get up this mountain and then finish the level after it without any health upgrades found throughout it. Speaking of those health upgrades, it's a pretty glaring issue with the game for me. You need to go back to an NPC or a world item or some other thing throughout the game to upgrade almost everything throughout the game. Found a new bile jar? Better trek back to the Fountains of Blood if you found one. The rosary string? Back to the NPC that can upgrade it. Make sure you have the currency to pay for them too. Want to go to one side of the map but haven't found the fast travel point? If there even is one there, tough luck, better get running and jumping. Maybe you died to an enemy slapping you into a pile of spikes that you couldn't see below you that instantly killed you. Better get running. You get the idea. There's even an endgame quest that requires you to run across the entire map without saving, fast traveling, or dying. Ironically, even with the issues I said before, it was my favorite quest. It was poorly designed with how many instant kill spike jumps you have to make, but that's what made it fun. And these jumps are usually very tight because of the penitent one's refusal to clamber when the spikes are at the same level as the floor. And there are a lot of those. By now, if you went the same way as I did on the second playthrough, you'll be climbing up out of the desecrated cistern after the Mercy Dreams boss. Or if you went down into the desecrated cistern before that, this boss will be the boss of the cistern. It's a double boss. It functions as the boss for both levels, which means that you do one, fight the boss, explore the other. But that means that these bosses can't be very difficult because of the split paths. If they made one harder, it'll just be discouraging you from exploring. As I said earlier, I was a stubborn idiot who's forced his way up to an area I felt like I shouldn't have been at. Halfway up that mountain, I found a shop, however, and this is a good time to talk about those, because there are only a couple of them throughout the entirety of the game, and all of the items aren't all that pricey. Naturally, every time I came across a shop, I bought all the items and hoarded them until the time came when a quest called for those items. Because they don't show up on the map, you'd have to remember where these shops are. Fortunately for me, I always had the currency to purchase all the items, and I had them throughout the whole game, which to me didn't seem right. Why would a shopkeeper be holding something that these quest NPCs would want? Why didn't they just buy them themselves? The items are cheap, so why wouldn't they? The only reasonable explanation I could think of is that they weren't all penitent ones, so they can't collect the Tears of Atonement to pay for them, which is what the enemies drop. It's the main currency of the game. Which leads to the question of how the shopkeeper will even use that currency if only one penitent one at a time can be alive. But I'm gonna move on from this since it isn't a large issue. Going back to the middle path, now that we've discussed the top and the bottom paths, it brings you to a giant bridge. This is the bridge you're trying to get across and open the door on the other side. This is the marker for the halfway point of the game. From what I've described so far of completing 2 areas, we're already about 30% through the game according to the game's own progress meter. I spent about an hour and a half going through my second playthrough as I wrote this, and it's 30% after that time. Granted, it was a second playthrough, so I'm moving through it much quicker. If you move to the left of this bridge, you can find the third area, which you need to go to, which means that there's even more. This indicates that by the time you get to this bridge, when you're done with the 3 areas, you will be about halfway done with the game. Thank you for watching part 1.